Wow, we are absolutely 100% live right now with the latest episode of Shout at Buffalo Bills Football Podcast. We've been sitting in the waiting room here for the last 5 minutes trying to start this podcast, and StreamYard was telling us that the servers are busy right now. Try again in 30 to 60 seconds, and it took 5 minutes. But hey, we are here on a Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Staples show. Shouts back in your life. What is up, Ryan Talbot?
Not too much, but oddly enough, it doesn't look like it pushed out on X. After all the false alarms, every false alarm was getting pushed out saying that we're live and no go. And now this last time, I'm not seeing anything, but it is what it is. We are happy that we're finally able to start this episode.
All right. Looks like we are streaming on YouTube, which is good news. Checking on the other platforms right now. What have you been up to the last couple of days?
You know, staying busy with the other job, with the kids. There's a nasty bug that was going around in my hometown. So knocked Owen for a loop for a day. And overall, though, staying busy with just that family life. What about you?
Pretty much the same. Obviously, some Matt Milano news, and that's where we're going to get started here tonight. But just overall, getting ready for baseball season. Got a draft tonight, draft tomorrow. These kids are getting excited to get outside. And actually, yesterday we had our first travel baseball practice outdoors. It was a little soggy, but it's like, you know, you get to this point in the winter and kids just want to get outside. And we have a little sun, so why not take advantage of it?
Oh, 100%. We have new turf facilities in Olean, so kids have been out practicing the last week or two, even with the colder weather, and it's been nice for them.
All right, it looks like we are live right now on X and all of the platforms, which is really good news. All right, Matt Milano, let's get into the details and kind of what this means, because I was talking on the radio show earlier this week, Danger and Battaglia, about this linebacker room, and you take a look at this room. It is all of a sudden one of the deeper rooms on the roster. You look at Dorian Williams, Terrell Bernard, Matt Milano, Eddie Ulofoshio, Joe Andreessen, and Balin Spector, and you are bringing back, before the draft even starts, 6 of your, key cogs in that room last season. Now, how things are changing going into next year, a lot of people were wondering if the Bills might consider moving on from Matt Milano this offseason. It didn't make a lot of financial sense, I didn't think, because of the dead cap number, but what they ultimately landed on was restructuring his deal, reworking it, to where he's taking a $3.6 million pay cut in 2025, and then the Bills are ripping up the contract in 2026. He'll become a free agent after this season. Gives the Bills $3.6 million in cap space. It allows Milano, who missed a full calendar year of football, the opportunity to maybe go back out there and earn that money back in incentives with the way that they reworked that deal a little bit. And there's a lot that goes into it, but at the very beginning, what are your first impressions of this reworked deal and what it means for Milano, maybe long-term?
No, first of all, for the Bills, it's a huge win, in my opinion. You're freeing up cap space. You're letting, you're getting to see if he still has it. He had the injury issues, a little bit of a slow go coming back from the injuries. I thought he started to look like his old self late in the season, in the playoff run. But this gives them a chance to kind of see what he has left in the tank in 2025. And if there's not a lot left in the tank, well, the contract's over in 2025. If there's still something left, you can go back to the table. He can try to get some of that money back in one final deal with the Bills, or he can just go out on a high note in Buffalo and maybe sign elsewhere to kind of finish up his career, because the Bills do have Dorian Williams waiting in the wings, and they do have a long list of young players that would love to, with experience and time, maybe compete for that job. So it's a win for Buffalo. For Milano, it's potentially a win depending on how he plays this season.
Yeah, so that's the piece of it that I think from the Bills' perspective is the most important piece of this. Is you put Milano in a spot where, listen, we always knew going into this season, the true test of where he's at and the level that he was going to ultimately get to was going to be in 2025. having a full offseason to finally lean in at a healthy place into his full recovery. And then we'll get a look at it in training camp, preseason, and then the regular season. And maybe he does look like the Matt Milano of old. But now you safeguard yourself in case he doesn't. You have a young player in Dorian Williams that can kind of step into that role if you need him to. And then it also doesn't, marry you to the player beyond next season. Listen, he's a big part of what they are. He was one of the first draft picks of Sean McDermott. Once he got here, Brandon Beane started a little bit after that draft. And I think in a lot of ways, we've seen the purge of a lot of these long-term Bills players, Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde. Matt Milano is eventually going to be the next name or one of the names in that long line. But I think this at least gives them the opportunity to say, okay, a veteran, a leader at his best, an elite level player at the position. Let's run it back one more time, see what it looks like. But we have some fail safes just in case it doesn't work the way that you want it to.
Yeah, and we've seen that with other positions, players where the Bills have said, let's give it another year. And when they brought back Jordan Poyer before he went to Miami last season, they would sign guys to short-term deals, hoping to get the best of that player. And, maybe Matt Milano still has this year and another good year left in the tank. Sometimes, though, it is better to be early to be out on a player than hold on too long. And that's no knock on Matt Milano. Like you said, he was a big part of the culture change in Buffalo, the shift from the drought team to this playoff team year in, year out. He meant so much to this team, but like you said, Father Time is undefeated. He is kind of that next guy, or one of those next guys based on his age and time that he's been here in Buffalo, the injuries. It all factors into eventually you do have to part ways, and that's kind of what this new rework deal kind of leads you to.
Somebody asking in the comments what the dead cap situation looks like. Before June 1st, after the rework deal, if the Bills were to move on from Matt Milano, which I don't think you do this move if you're even considering that, it would become with a $22 million dead cap charge. Post June 1st, that's a little bit more palpable. It's a $12 million dead cap hit, and you add $350,000 in cap space. I don't think the Bills are eager to do that because, again, you could rewind the clock 2 years. This was a position that lacked depth considerably. I mean, so much so that they had to go get AJ Klein off of his, RV before he was set to go on vacation. They don't want to be in that spot again. And Roy Collins said he wouldn't call Balin Spector a key cog. I agree. Probably not wise to put him in that department. I meant more so guys that have been part of this room and part of this, defense for the last couple of years, not the rookies last year, but everybody else. And then what the rookies were able to do last year, specifically Andreessen, and what you hope you're going to get from Ulofoshio moving into this season. I mean, really, if you're the Bills, you're hoping by the end of training camp, people are talking about Ulofoshio as somebody that is at least set up as part of a position battle. He's a 5th round pick going into his second season. That's a win if you got another player that's kind of pushing against the door. Am I projecting that to happen? No, they really believe in Dorian Williams. It's going to take a lot from Ulofoshio, but go back to the draft period. People talking about how much this guy was so good at Washington in coverage, something where the Bills are going to continually look to improve. I think Michael Hoyt, that addition, a big piece of that is not only his ability to rush, but the kind of chess piece that he can be, and at times even use him in the coverage plan. I think they're going to reevaluate everything when it comes to all 3 levels of this defense. We're going to talk about cornerback in a second, but I think take Spector out of it. The other 5 guys are going to be part of the mix here.
Yeah, Spector's like one of those extra Legos that you get in the set. When all is said and done, it's good to have, but you hope you don't have to use it. You hope that all the other pieces are there that you need. But when it comes to Ulofoshio specifically, I'm glad you mentioned him. The relative athletic score is off the charts. It fits what the Bills look for in linebackers, the athleticism, the movement ability. And now that he's had a full season in this system, knowing the playbook, knowing what the Bills want him to do in the offseason from his rookie year to year 2, he has that time to maybe put on a little bit more muscle or whatever it is that they said at that end of the year meeting. So that does at least give him that opportunity to come in and compete, like you said, for a job. Nothing is guaranteed, but there's a reason why they did draft him on Day 3 of the draft last year. It wasn't just to be a special teams player. As a rookie, absolutely. But now they're going to want to see that role expand.
Thank you so much for watching on this Wednesday evening. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. A little bit over 700 watching across all platforms. We appreciate you being a part of this conversation. Josh Richardson, one of our YouTube subscribers, says that's talking about the dead cap number, wondering if that's correct. So according to overthecap.com, I'm looking at it right now, a pre-June 1st cut would result in a $22.8 million dead cap charge with a net negative of almost 11 million in cap space. So that obviously wouldn't happen. When you click the tab for cut, it goes to 11.8 million in a dead cap charge post June 1st. So that's according to overthecap.com. I know a lot of these guys, we have Mike Giannetti from Spot Track on very often. A lot of these things are moving parts as they're getting kind of contract numbers in, but that at least has what it is on the website.
Right. And he may have been talking to someone else in the chat too that put in a number that I'm looking at it. So I might not have even been questioning what you had read off of Over the Cap.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about the linebacker position. The other position, I mean, if we're kind of resetting the deck here for first wave of free agency in terms of what the Bills have to really address moving into the next wave and then beyond, and obviously looking down the barrel at the draft, cornerback to me is at the top of the list of the positions that I'd say are a slight concern right now with where the Bills stand. You have franchise staple Christian Benford. You've moved on from Kaiir Elam. You've re-signed Dane Jackson after a year in Carolina. We're going to talk about him in a minute. Jamarcus Ingram is another one of your long-term cornerbacks who kind of has that versatility. I don't put him in the boundary only bucket only because he can play slot. You could put him in that dime safety role as well. What the Bills have done to this point, I think, is left a lot to be desired. Now, this next wave of free agency just might be where they were eyeing to maybe add a veteran cornerback. Maybe they're looking to the draft, and then even beyond as you get into cap casualties in August, all the way up until roster cut down. You can add a safety at that point. Maybe Rasul Douglas goes out and tries to find a market. It's not there. He returns to the roster, which changes the math a little bit. But what are your first impressions about Dane Jackson now returning to the Bills for a second stint?
It's fine. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably as excited as I think fans should get about it. It's a good depth piece, and a keyword on depth. I really don't want him in the mix to be cornerback 2 opposite Christian Benford. But if he is the first player off the bench, second player off the bench, Bills fans should be thrilled with that. He has tons of experience in the system. We know that when he's out there, you can count on him to be in the right position, right spot. The ceiling is limited, though. You know what you're getting out of Dane Jackson. You know that it's not going to get better than what it was in stint number 1, and he was a fine cornerback. But you want better than fine. You want to find someone opposite Christian Benford where if everything goes well, you're going to be giving Benford a large deal. And boy, that the numbers on cornerbacks just keep going up, which is a little worrisome. But if you have him on a big extension in time, then you would love to have a rookie that you can develop. And I think maybe that is the plan. You have Dane Jackson as depth. You sign another cornerback in the second, third wave as depth. But then you draft or maybe cornerback 2 potentially for one season, an older player. But you draft someone with your first pick, your second pick, you develop them, and you hope that by the end of the rookie season or their second year that they are that guy opposite Christian Benford. They need to go over, all the different scouting reports. They need to be in lockstep in terms of what they're looking for specifically at the cornerback position. They seem to be making a little bit of a shift in terms of maybe playing a little bit more man than they've used to in the past, a split of man and zone. Find someone, though, that fits what you need. Don't jump for a player just because it's that next guy on your list. We saw how that worked out with Kaiir Elam, who is now in Dallas. Make sure that whoever it is that you draft, whether it's in round 1, on day 2 of the draft, even early on day 3, that you have that faith and confidence that they can develop into that cornerback 2, either by the end of their rookie season or by year 2 at the latest.
I'm going to talk through both sides of my mouth right now when I discuss the addition of Dane Jackson. There's the one side of my mouth where I like Dane Jackson a lot. I think he's great for the locker room. I think he's got leadership qualities. I think he is a high floor addition in the cornerback room that gives you like great depth. Here's the other part of the equation, though. I don't trust this defensive coaching staff to not interject him into the position battle, especially if the only other addition is via the draft. I mean, we've seen this story before. Dane Jackson is fresh off his last stint in Buffalo, helping to keep Kyer Elam on the bench at times during that stint. And as much as I feel like Sean McDermott has grown, and maybe this could be the next really true test, how much has Sean McDermott grown with young players? They spend a first-round pick or a day 2 pick on a cornerback who then slots into, all right, he needs to be the starter opposite Christian Benford because of the asset that you spent on him. In a lot of ways, like Dwayne Carter as a third-round pick, we're heading in with the addition of Larry Ogunjobi, and you haven't really talked on the podcast yet too much about that. We can get into your reaction to all that in a little bit. But right now, I'm sitting here slating Dwayne Carter at number 3 at 3-tech defensive tackle, which to me, for a third-round pick, it's not good enough. Like I want a path to playing time for someone that you invest that kind of draft capital in. And I just don't know if, well, it will be there now because of what happened to Ogunjobi, but we'll see what happens in the draft. We'll see who they add. I've maintained that I think no matter what happens with Ogunjobi and Hoyt, it shouldn't affect the draft approach. They should still go into the draft looking to add at defensive tackle and at edge rusher. But to me, Dane Jackson is like that, that comfortable, safe addition because you know him, but they're also falling into their previous behavior in terms of relying on the guys that they know from previous stops. And now they're so long into their tenure that it's become Buffalo players instead of Carolina Panthers that they bring back. And I get that. And listen, in a lot of instances, it works. And if Dane Jackson is CB4 with special teams upside, sign me up. But
100%.
But if we look ahead, and I have a crystal ball, and in that crystal ball, it shows me he's competing for the job week 1, I'm not signing up for that. And I don't like the signing in that scenario.
Yeah. If I see him on the week 1 graphic starting, I would be very upset if I were a Bills fan. That is not what you want Dane Jackson in here for. You want him for that depth. And there are still players on the market that potentially could come in and give you that veteran option to compete for cornerback 2. I know fans will not be thrilled with this name because of how it ended the first stint, but Stephon Gilmore, he's older. He's 34. He is literally a 1-year stopgap. I thought he still played very well in Minnesota and in all of his previous stops. He has a relationship with Mike Pellegrino, who is coming over from New England. This is not the Bills team that he left where he wanted to leave and go to a contender. They are a contender now. So that's just one example. I'm not saying, go out and sign Stephon Gilmore, but there are still players out there that you could have as that Larry Ogunjobi. And I'm glad you mentioned this. I thought of Ogunjobi signing before the whole suspension news as a safety valve for the Bills, whereas Dwayne Carter as a rookie flashed a little bit early on, suffered the wrist injury, and he never looked the same again the rest of his rookie year. He disappointed. I think Ogunjobi at 31 years old off the top of my head, you have him as an option for depth behind Ed Oliver if Carter does not step up early in the year. You're hoping, though, that Carter outplays him and wins that job, but you don't want to build your depth chart based on hopes and where you think this player can be. So it's good for competition to have a player of Ogunjobi's caliber. Now, as you said, the whole suspension changes the dynamics of that position. Maybe they have to go out and add another veteran 3-tech into the mix. Maybe Jordan Phillips is just going to be sitting by his phone in August, knowing that the Bills are eventually going to come calling for him. He's already said it's Bills or nowhere before, and they could put that to the test this summer.
Well, I think Phillips is back no matter what, because to me, he trends as the practice squad guy this year, right? Like final cut, shake your hand, see you on the practice squad, and you'll be a part of this team all season. And if injuries pop up, number one, he could be back in the mix for a run because you know what he gives you in a pinch, and you can kind of keep him healthy on the bench, if you will, on the practice squad. So I think he'll be back regardless. He's like the new version. I'm trying to think of one of those guys that have just kind of hung around year after year after year. Receiver. What's a good example of this, Ryan?
For someone that's hung around year after year
Yeah.
after year.
Somebody that they keep kind of bringing back even after they've left, because I mean, Dane Jackson kind of falls into that. I know he hasn't had the 3 stints, but he's almost on his way there.
You've mentioned AJ Klein,
Shaq Lawson can kind of
Shaq
throw
Lawson, younger player, but like Ilianku always being like waiting in the wings.
Yeah, right. And
literally,
right
as
you said that, AMR in the YouTube chat. Very good. No, I think, listen, there's nobody in the local media group that's going to talk more highly of Dane Jackson than I. And it's not an indictment of him. It's more so removing myself from that and looking organizationally at the approach and kind of the safe bet. People are asking about Asante Samuel Jr. in the comments right now. And here's one from Manowar, who's one of our regulars. Once the Bills knew that Larry Ogunjobi was going to be banned for 6 games, couldn't they not sign him? Yes, they could have just said, you know what? We're learning of this. We already have one guy going. We're going to rip up this contract. Brandon Beane explained that the reason they didn't do that is because there wasn't anybody really else out available on the market that interested him, whatever you think of that, and then pivoted and signed Asante Samuel Jr. instead. Well, and then draft somebody at D-line in the draft. 2 things. Number one, they could still sign Asante Samuel Jr. right now, and they could also still draft somebody at defensive line despite, I mean, the Ogunjobi piece, like if you're worried about his roster spot on the other side of things, he's going to be suspended for 6 games, and then you can figure out what to do with him on the other side of it. If you get into the season and you have some young players that are playing well and you're happy with what you have on the roster, you can activate him and then look for a trade partner and try to get like a day 3 pick next year or whatever that ends up being. Or you bring him back in the mix because what you've seen of what you have isn't where you need it to be. But I don't think those 2 things have to be mutually exclusive. I think they could still go out and bring in Samuel Jr. if that's somebody that they think is an option in the competition for CB2.
And Samuel Jr. is still on the market for a reason, coming off of a shoulder injury. There could be concerns about that, stinger symptoms. The medical team, whoever signs him, will have to do their due diligence on the player to make sure that you feel like they're going to hold up. He's kind of a name right now, though, out there. I don't know that he's ever necessarily played to the level of his father's namesake at the cornerback position or as a defensive back. And he just seems to be the hot name right now. And that's not a knock on him. Right? When you look at the cornerback market, there's not a ton of great options left. You'd be banking on maybe upside or how he would fit into your system more than anything else. But this is not like a defensive player of the year that's just sitting on the market that you think you can plug in and play and it automatically or suddenly fixes things for the Bills.
So many people watching here on a Wednesday night. We appreciate you joining us. Hit that like button, subscribe as well over on YouTube. We really appreciate that. Derek Babcock, one of our OGs on the Shout podcast. Josh Norman is a great throwback. Somebody that I think had 3 stints with the Bills, which is crazy considering where they started with him at the tail end of his career. So that's an interesting one as well. All right. The next part of the conversation I want to get to is the very interesting, I was going to say intriguing, but I'm going to go with interesting addition of Laviska Shenault at the end last week, where kind of buried in all of the headlines for the Bills late in the week. I mean, you see the big free agent signings headlined by Joey Bosa, Josh Palmer. You have all of this around the Kaiir Elam trade. Then you have the 2 guys getting suspended. We have just not heard a lot on the addition of Shenault. And Ryan, if we rewind the clock a little bit, this was a bona fide Bills Mafia draft crush a couple years ago. I mean, everybody, I won't say everybody, but the majority of Bills fans were all aboard the Laviska Shenault hype train. And I think there is a pocket of fans that still believe this is a guy that just hasn't had his opportunity yet. Now, when the Bills signed him, one of my first texts out to the insiders was, this kind of feels like this spring, summer's version of Chase Claypool. Now, I think that's a little bit harsh knowing what we know in hindsight about Chase Claypool. I think there's much more opportunity for Laviska Shenault. But what are you putting the expectations at for what he could potentially be for the Bills this offseason? Is he somebody that's going to strictly factor into return duties? Is he somebody that can make a run at a 5th or 6th roster spot at wide receiver? How are you viewing this signing, and how intrigued are you, if we use that word?
Intrigue's kind of low right now, and I hope I'm proven wrong with Shenault. I had him in a few mock
You're
drafts.
fresh off the Claypool experience, and me more than you, I think, was super high on him and got burned in a lot of ways. So I think it's safe to not overreact to something like this. But I think when you add a guy with this kind of draft stock, draft hype, it's intriguing.
Sure,
minimally.
And a few years ago, I definitely had him to the Bills in a few mock drafts, or if I know for a fact I had him penciled in a few, and he was a very popular name linked to the Bills. I look at him as a kick returner first. He did a nice job as a kick returner last year, did not factor in to the wide receiving, room much. But there is still some glimmer of hope that maybe he can be the kick returner / final wide receiver on this roster. And you can give him a few scattered targets here and there. In his first 3 seasons in this league, Matt, he forced 51 missed tackles. That's intriguing. But the fall off at the position, the first 2 years, over 600 yards receiving, kind of came into the league, and yeah, there was a lot of volume going his way, but since then it's dwindled. It's gone down greatly. So I really don't know what his path is, minus really impressing as that kick returner and claiming maybe that final spot at wide receiver.
So one of the things that I think of is, and this is just kind of outside the box thinking, when they brought in Curtis Samuel last year, to me, the idea was to get their version of the Deebo Samuel model. Now, they're very different players, but I just mean in the versatility of where he can line up in the offense, in the backfield, in the slot, out wide, running in motion. To me, Laviska Shenault fits into that role maybe even better from a front office perspective, as they've kind of searched for that. If that's ever been, they've alluded to it at times over the years, something in that kind of department. Because if you go back to the Isaiah McKenzie experiment, to me, they were trying to kind of force him into that role, and he just wasn't consistent or good enough in that role to fill it. I think Samuel can be that. The problem with Samuel is the injuries. And to me, bringing in Shenault kind of is that fail safe. If you get into next year and Samuel's banged up again in training camp or in the off-season program or into the preseason, you might want to cut bait with him at some point, move Shenault into that 4-5 receiver role. But, and somebody, I think it was Walter here on YouTube, said, if Shenault ends up being wide receiver 5 or 6 in the current model of what's on the roster, that is concerning. And I don't think that you're aiming for that. I don't think receivers should be off the table in the draft. And I also don't think wide receivers should be off the table via trade, if that's something that the Bills can do financially, cap-wise. We've talked about Chris Olave on this podcast. The George Pickens conversation, it's a longer one because it's nuanced. There are some things that you'd have to be able to stomach if you were going to onboard somebody like Pickens. And we won't get into that right now. But if a trade becomes apparent to Brandon Beane to add a bona fide number 1 type of receiver, I wouldn't kind of close the door on that option, or look to add somebody really exciting that gives you some long field speed, route running, and ability in the draft.
Yeah, Shenault should not close the door on any opportunities. Draft, trade, even maybe someone else in free agency that you bring in for further competition. He is someone that you're going to bring in. Maybe he can be a gadget guy on this offense, in addition to the kick return skills, be that final wide receiver. But in no way, shape, or form am I sitting here today in late March saying that this is a player that is going to make this roster. I think the percentage of him not making the roster right now is significantly better. So He's got to come out, have a nice spring, a la Chase Claypool, but then carry that over to the summer, stay healthy, and show what he can do at camp.
So, speaking of the wide receiver room, have you paid attention at all to the media blitz that Keon Coleman has seemingly been on the last week or two?
A little bit. I saw some of the Carmelo Anthony highlights in that interview. I saw the one recently about his first meal with Josh Allen and the fish and the onions, and he's like, "This is the stuff that Jesus served the people," and well, why am I eating this? So those are the two things I've seen. Yeah.
I think it's interesting in a couple of different ways. Like the typical Buffalo Bills year 1 to year 2 rookie into second year player is going radio silent in the offseason, right? They had a year with the Bills who, they do a good job of like the media training, the PR training, and Keon's been anything but that. I mean, the routes working with Delphonte Diamond, they've been out, tweeted around the social media and put on different platforms. He's gone on several podcasts. I think he went on with Shannon Sharp and Chad Ochocinco, where I saw him arguing with Ochocinco about Ochocinco being able to, lock him up. And that was an interesting clip that I saw. And I don't know if that's something that's coming out that they're previewing, whatever. I bring this up only because I was listening to Brandon Beane on with Fitz and Andrew Whitworth. He was on that podcast this week. And one of the things that they were talking about with Keon is the maturity thing that they kind of touched on at the end of the season, Beane did in his press conference. But they had a longer conversation about how much NIL specifically has impacted the modern athlete and how not ready they are for the league, like the expectations, the way that you're treated. Because if you're bouncing around to different schools, I mean, I'm just reading between the lines here. You have Keon Coleman, who started his career at Michigan State, then went over to Florida State, and obviously in the first few years of NIL money, and you get treated a certain kind of way. And I think when you get to the league, and we know how Sean McDermott is with rookies, everything is earned. You walk in, whether you're the first round draft pick, Kyrie Elam, or 6th round draft pick, Christian Benford, or undrafted Jamarcus Ingram, you are in the same bucket and treated the same way. And maybe that was a situation for Keon Coleman where there was adjustment period needed, and that's what he's taking into year 2, maybe more than anything. And I think that's the part of it that we can't forget to talk about over the next 5 to 6 months is the projected leap that could happen with Keon Coleman just being grounded enough to be ready for the expectations, the grind, competing, and everything at the NFL level.
And I'm sure he hears the noise and some of the talk about how he looked after the injury. He touched upon that a little bit, throwing off his psyche after the wrist injury. And now he's got to bounce back from it. You were a almost first round pick, first pick of the second round. Buffalo's first pick in that draft class. They have high hopes for you, high expectations. He was making plays pre-wrist injury that were kind of showing the Bills right at times. It wasn't consistent. It wasn't someone that was going to take over this offense, but when his number was called, he was making enough plays to justify that pick and to think, okay, he's fitting into this everyone eats offense very well. He's got to get back to that. He's got to be able to make those 50-50 catches. We know that the separation on regular routes is going to be difficult, so he's got to make those contested catches. And there are times where Josh Allen, though, extends plays, and then he was able to get open downfield. You can just see more of that in year 2 as well.
One of the questions in the comments here is about Luther Burden. How much have you watched him if he's available at 30? Because if you think about, Ted McMillan, Matthew Golden, and Luther Burden, on a lot of people's boards, those are the guys that I think people are talking about as being first round draft picks. There might be another one in there that I'm missing. I haven't watched a ton of Burden. I have his highlight reel up right now. The first 4 routes that he's run, 3 of them have been out of the slot. So I kind of, that kind of dips guys down on my board a little bit. Sure. If they do a lot of slot work at the college level. To me, the guy that I would want the Bills to target in this draft, the profile is a Brian Thomas Jr. type that has some long speed, that has got a lot of good tape on the boundary, whether it be X or Z, somebody that can get separation, all those little, characteristics. How much do you know of Burden and what he might, if he might fit into that?
No, I think you kind of nailed it. He does project or play a lot of the slot in college. I think he's a very talented receiver, but the Bills already have some options out of the slot. Obviously, Shakir first and foremost. They love him, extended him. You need the deep speed. You need the typical type of X receiver. I know Keon came in to play the X role, but one of the outside receiver roles that you can rely on a little bit more. And while I don't want the Bills to have to go into this draft and say they have to go with position A or B, wide receiver, as much as I want to see them address it at some point in the draft, it's far down compared to cornerback and defensive tackle, specifically one tech right now. You could talk about edge rusher. I know they've addressed it, but you have Hoyt on the 6-game suspension. Even that would probably slot in ahead of wide receiver for me right now. So at pick 30, I don't think that he would be on. I don't think Burden would be an ideal choice for me, but I still think he's going to be a talented player in this league.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the NFL.com profile, and I might be changing my tune a little bit. Lance Zierlein compares him to Garrett Wilson, who I do think played a lot of slot in college. Here's the other thing that you got to be careful too. I mentioned that Justin Jefferson played a ton of slot at LSU.
Right.
And a lot of that had to do with, I think it was Terrence Marshall was spread out wide a lot, Jamar Chase. It was an elite offense. And sometimes you got to play where you play. Some of the things like being able to separate at all three levels is a part of Burden's scouting report. Early acceleration to bypass defenders, eludes route redirection, natural playmaking skills and instincts, stacks, tracks, and adjusts to deep balls like an outfielder. Those are some of the things that sign me up, right? Like if you're in that spot, if you have a super high first round grade on a guy, some of the knocks on Burden is that, he takes plays off, maybe got a little bit bored in Missouri, whether it be with their offensive scheme, things like that. So there's a lot of things that go into the evaluation. But if you think he fits into if you're Joe Brady, and that's the thing that we don't talk about enough about Joe Brady, by the way, he is like he's been around so many great wide receivers going back to his college days, getting a chance to be around Diggs here in Buffalo for a couple of seasons before that relationship ended, going back, with Jefferson and Chase and all those guys. He knows what he's seeing when he's looking at elite wide receiver talent. And I think I might push back and argue with you a little bit on that. I understand the needs at other places, but to me, cornerback being in need doesn't mean that you have to focus in on it in round one, knowing the track record that this regime has had late in drafts.
Yeah, and there are names in the Mafia here in the chat. Buka, which again, kind of a slot guy or kind of redundant to the skill set. But Golden, Bond, there are players. I've been banging the table for Jalen Royals as a day 2 pick option. There are playmakers that the Bills can certainly target in this draft class. Real quick, though, pivoting, we do have a super chat here from Carl, and he said, "Hey guys, Mel Kiper just did a mock draft. He had defensive tackle Kenneth Grant going to the Bills. Do you think we could get Grant as he could free up Oliver?" Yes, I think the Bills can get Grant. I don't know if they can get him at 30. They might have to trade up a little bit for him.
Is that where Kiper had him?
I believe he 30? Did have him at 30. And
so did Daniel Jeremiah, gave him Grant in his latest mock draft at 30 as well. No pro day yet. No pro day yet.
It's possible. No pro day. If he puts up monster stats, that could change things. There's only so many teams that maybe are looking for a monster one tech, especially that early in the draft. There are some players, rounds 2, 3, 4, that you might be able to get and plug in there. It might not be your most pressing matter. So it wouldn't shock me if the Bills had to use one of their day 3 picks, an addition to pick 30 to move up slightly to go up and get Grant, but he would be a great addition on paper based on his skill set and what the Bills need.
I'm all aboard the Grant hype train. I had him on the mock draft last month, but the big reason why is, to me, that's a position that when you could find somebody that potentially is superstar qualities or upside or ceiling, and you can get him on a rookie contract, especially at a position where the Bills have been, let's be honest, devoid of talent over the course of the entirety of their run. They've never had a running mate outside of, I'd say, 5 to 10 games of Daquan Jones at his peak. But even then, I think you could argue that that was an upgradable spot. Kenneth Grant, there's some people talking about like Chris Jones potential just with his ceiling. And we played that party, right? We've attended that party. Dalton Kincaid was going to be Travis Kelce 2 years ago, and we haven't necessarily seen that yet. Although, man, Brandon Beane is putting an exclamation point on what to expect from Dalton Kincaid. The way that he's talking about him, I would be very much buying Dalton Kincaid stock in 2025. He was on the Fitz podcast, and he said, again, he's already been in the building a bunch this offseason. He's motivated. He's heard the noise. So buy all of that stock. The big question I have with Dalton Kincaid, though, is how are you going to deploy these two tight ends and find a way to have them both be successful and a part of your offense? I mean, there's a lot of mouths to feed in this offense.
Yeah, 100%. With Kincaid, health is going to matter. Staying healthy, showing that he can do that. In the back of my mind, I wonder how much that last play against Kansas City is going to motivate him in terms of how he looks this upcoming season. It would have been a difficult catch adjusting to that ball. It could have made it, should have made it. You could argue, absolutely. But maybe that's the thing that's going to help him elevate to this next level. The health factor, first and foremost, knowing what he played through last year, but the noise and maybe feeling like he let the team down. I know that the multiple teammates said that wasn't the case. It's a team deal, but individual players probably sit there and rewind plays in their mind over and over again. And that play specifically would have kept the Bills alive in that game.
Daryl says, our buddy on YouTube and X, Grant's going to be a top 15 to 18 pick. I totally agree. I think the pro day is going to send his stock through the roof, and I think the Bills are going to have to get aggressive to trade up. But I think at that position, whether it be edge or defensive tackle, it's worth trading up that much. I mean, I know it was quarterback, so it's not a great comparison, but the aggressiveness that the Kansas City Chiefs showed in 2017 to go up from 27 to 10 to get Patrick Mahomes at the time, I think a lot of people questioned it. Like, that's a huge haul to give up to go up and get a future first round pick. But if you think you can get a difference maker on a rookie contract, you make that move every single time.
On a rookie deal for potentially 5 years with the 5th year option. Yeah, without a doubt, you go and make a move like that. This is probably the Bills really need to get aggressive with it with 10 picks, 2 second-round picks for that matter. If they really need to make a big jump up, they have the ability to do so.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. We're up against it time-wise. We'll come back with an episode in the next few days, hopefully before the end of the week. What I want to do next, Ryan, is do a quick take stock on what the Bills have done, look ahead, give them some free agency grades. Listen, a lot of people are high on what the Bills have done in free agency across the NFL media community. We'll talk about where they've addressed their roster, and then we'll kind of look ahead. Next week is the NFL owners meetings. I'll be heading down to Palm Beach. We'll get to catch up with Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, so more from that. A ton of stuff coming up. And, become a Shout Insider, 716-528-6727. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 a month. After that, any Bills news happens, you will be getting analysis from myself and Ryan. You can't beat it, right, buddy?
Right. Perfect time to sign up. That second, third wave of free agency. Tons of draft talk with pro days still ongoing. In the next few weeks, we should be hearing a lot about top 30 visitors, private workouts, and more. And the insiders will have that news first.
Great episode. Glad to be back in the saddle. We'll see you in a couple days. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Take care.